If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
And welcome to If This Goes On, Don't Panic. I'm Diane Morrison.
And I'm Alan Bailey. Today we have authors Dan Scammel and Bradley Sides. But before we get to our amazing guests, I have a couple announcements. So for those of you in the chat session right now, we are going to be doing a book giveaway. Ask a question to our guests and I'll send you a book. Basically, that's what it comes down to. And for those of you who are quiet and introverted like myself and don't always like to speak up at these types of things, yes, I am quiet and introverted, believe it or not. You can just email us at itgodon'tpanic@gmail.com. That's itgodon'tpanic@gmail.com. And just tell us what your favorite episode of If This Goes On, Don't Panic is, and I will send you a book. It's that simple. I got a whole pile of them over here. I've got stuff from Sarah Pinsker. I got Terry Pratchett, Ramsey Campbell. I've got Kurt Vonnegut, Cory Doctorow, even Robert Heinlein. I got a bunch of stuff over here, so just let me know, and I'd be happy to send it to you. I have to warn you, though, most of them are not new. Most of them are lightly used, because that's the best way to buy cheap books, right? Okay. So we have one other announcement before we get started, and we've been teasing this for quite some time, but it is actually done now, and we are going to be having a new logo soon.
I'm very happy with it. It's really cool. I think it represents the podcast very well. The artist did a great job.
Yeah, I was very worried at first that it wasn't going to turn out the way that we wanted it to. You know, I've worked with artists in the past and have sometimes been disappointed with the results, but I think this came out fantastic. Our artist, Brie Casagnazzi, she did a fantastic job. I'm super excited, and I can't wait to reveal those to everybody.
Yeah, so when do we do that? Next episode? Next recorded episode?
I don't know. That's a good question. We do need to figure that out. Maybe we need to call a podcast meeting and chat it out.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, maybe we'll do like a cover reveal or whatever. We'll do like a logo reveal or something.
Yeah, maybe I can like blur it out or something. Yeah, definitely. I have a huge stack of them here, so please take some free books, please.
Is the wife telling you to get rid of some of the stuff and make some space?
That may possibly be where some of them came from. Maybe, possibly.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Well, who are our guests today, Alan? I can't wait to get into this.
Yeah. And so if you haven't been to a live episode before, the way that this works is we do the first half an hour with one guest and then the second half an hour with the second guest. Usually they're both here and the first one stays to the second and the second one's here for the first. So sometimes there's some banter back and forth between the guests and everything. But we are going to start with Dan Scammel. Dan Scammel is a writer of weird and speculative fiction, which takes place in a slightly less pleasant version of the world in which we live. His co-written weird novella, Stuck Together With You, was released in 2023, and his short fiction has appeared in anthologies like From the Dead and Ooze, Little Bursts of Body Horror, and magazines such as The Molotov Cocktail. His first novel, Walnut Ridge, from Dead Star Press, is available now, and that's what we're going to be talking about, actually. He currently lives in Pennsylvania, where in addition to writing, he creates artwork, plays drums, and watches too much professional wrestling. So welcome, Dan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And I'll introduce Brad real quick, but Brad's probably not going to be talking too much till the second half.
He's welcome to, but yeah, just to make it clear, you're welcome to jump in if you got something to contribute to the conversation. We're pretty free flowing here, right? So
we are. But just for my own sanity and organization, I'm going to be asking Dan questions more directly first, and then Brad more on the side, more in the second half. Okay, so Bradley Sides is the author of 2 short story collections, Those Fantastic Lives and Crocodile Tears Didn't Cause the Flood, which we will be discussing today. His fiction appears at Bull, Ghost Parachute, Necessary Fiction, Psychopomp, Superstition Review, and elsewhere. His stories have been nominated for Year's Best Weird Fiction and featured on LeVar Burton Reads. Oh, that's awesome.
Sweet.
Congrats on that. Additionally, he has written reviews, interviews, and essays for Chapter 16, Chicago Review of Books, Electric Literature, Los Angeles Review of Books, The Millions, The Rumpus, and Southern Review of Books. In 2019, he was selected to participate in LitHub's Secret of the Book Critics. Bradley holds an MFA from Queen's University of Charlotte, where he served as fiction editor of Q. I'm guessing that's how that's pronounced. Q, is that right?
QU.
QU. Oh, okay. QU. He is a previous board member of the Alabama Writers Cooperative, and currently he lives in Huntsville, Alabama with his wife. On most days, he can be found teaching writing at Calhoun Community College. So welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Me too.
Awesome. So, as I mentioned, we're going to kind of start with Dan and then work our way through here. Dan, your book is quite something. It's quite interesting. It's so strange. So, just to give the audience an idea of what's going on, let me give you all kind of a very short summary of what happens. These aliens come to Earth and they basically tell everybody they can take you to a heaven-like place, right? But you have to be turned into sentient goo in order to go there. The aliens also come down in this like appearance of robots, but it's kind of like badly done robotic mannequin robots. Would that be a correct description, Dan?
Yeah, that sounds pretty on point, yeah.
And then the characters are like there's a bear that's like possessed by an alien, and there's a human that's been turned into sentient goo, a regular human. There's, of course, the robot alien angels, which, I mean, I don't think I've ever thought I would say that sentence in my life, robot alien angels. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff going on. And the main characters basically are like, I'm not into this, but everybody else has already joined up for the promise, right? And have been turned into goo. So it's kind of like almost like an apocalypse too, right?
Yeah, kind of like how I describe it is sort of like, it's sort of like the most boring end of the world story you could imagine.
But it's not boring, though. It's not boring.
Thank you.
No, it's not. No, I mean, the characters and the way that you do the aliens and everything, are really what keep it interesting.
We have a comment here from the audience. Celto says, who's a first-time chatter, welcome to the channel, says, I get turned into goo and I get to go to heaven. Win-win. We also have a question from Flub when you're ready for those.
Yeah, okay. Read the end of the book first before you say that. So I have a question about your aliens. What did you think about when you were designing your aliens? Because there's actually 3 alien races involved here, and you don't really know that right away.
No, the first ones that you're introduced to are the ones that take the form of the robotic angels, and the robots are kind of poorly put together. They don't really look very good, and they're way too large. And kind of that just speaks to sort of the overall theme of like presumption that kind of goes through the novel, that these aliens were like, oh, we're so far advanced. Like if we just take a guess at what they'll respond to when we show up, it'll be good enough. And it sort of ends up working despite the shortcomings that they run into. Yeah. But it was mostly just that one was pretty much just because I find that sort of thing to be sort of a funny gag. And then you have the other race, which is they're 2-dimensional, and I always like to play with a lot of like a lot of Vonnegut work that he talks about 4-dimensional aliens, and so I was thinking, well, what if like we think that because we're 3-dimensional, we're above other things, but like if you really try to conceive of like a 2-dimensional creature, it's a little harder to sort of wrap your mind around. So I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
The final ones are just sort of your basic, floating balls of light that are, ostensibly benevolent and all-knowing, the easy way out.
Yeah. The balls of light, were those the cocoon aliens, like from that?
Yeah, that's sort of like what I had in mind, actually, was that sort of can't quite conceive of it, but, sort of comes across pleasant looking enough.
Yeah. Well, I will say I really enjoyed how you made basically everyone incompetent, except for the balls of light, right?
Yeah.
Like all the aliens are incompetent. Basically, all the humans are incompetent. I love that, because usually when alien races are presented in science fiction, they're like at least equal to humans or better, right? They're never totally incompetent. Like, why make that decision?
I think part of it, like I said, a lot of it is intended to be kind of humorous and to sort of buck the traditions that I was used to and sort of turn things on their head. I just think it's funny how, we do have these assumptions that, like, space travelers would be so much more advanced than us and so much smarter in all respects. But, judging just by what we see around here, how technology continues and culture continues, and we look back on things even as close as, 10, 20 years ago and say, like, well, that was kind of dumb, wasn't it? Now in hindsight. And, I don't think that's exclusive to, humanity, if there are other races out there. And also, I like stories where, like, all the characters are a little bit like every character you meet is a little more stupid, or maybe not quite as competent as the last one, but maybe in different ways. So I don't know. I just feel like that kind of makes it a little more interesting in lieu of a villain, because I tend not to put like actual just straight on villains in stories, because I don't find them that interesting. I'd rather have sort of bumbling, kind of flawed characters.
Yeah.
Yeah. James Woodwright points out that Doctor Who season 16 also did things with, like, the glowing balls of light. Yeah. He's a Whovian, so I figured I'd, throw that in there. I was intrigued by the whole premise of the presumption, right? Like, it's kind of it's a theme I've explored in, well, okay, so I don't often talk about faith, right? But for myself, I am a neo-pagan, right? I'm a Wiccan, right? And the jury's out for me in terms of whether it's all psychological projections, right? That we tap into through the ideas of, semiotic ghosts, so to speak, to use a term that science fiction people will be familiar with, right? Or whether it's like, these beings that we interact with actually have some sort of reality. But the thing about them is they're not human, right? And as a result, they don't get it sometimes, right? Like, some faiths talk about following the will of God, right? A neo-pagan will not follow willingly or automatically anyway follow the will of whatever deity they're talking to, because they get that deity may not understand that, time is finite, physical bodies have limits, right? They just might not get it. So they might say, you do realize what you're asking here, right? So I really kind of like this idea of, extra dimensional sort of beings that may have abilities that we don't, that are kind of just as dumb as we are. That's great.
Yeah, I kind of, if anything, that I could relate it to would be kind of like, sometimes if you see people in management and you kind of wonder, man, how did they get there?
Oh, so often.
Like, relatable.
You've obviously worked at some corporations, I can tell.
Yeah.
So obviously, you enjoy satire. You brought up Vonnegut already. This book is clearly a satire. What is it about satire that helps you kind of explore the world that you've created and the world that we live in? What do you like about it, and how does that help you, like, deal with things?
I think that for me, a lot of it is that I look around and a lot of stuff just kind of doesn't make sense to me. And my brain is sort of wired to try and make sense of things and sort of problem solve. And so it finds itself sort of confounded a lot. And
yeah,
I feel like finally, coming into, my middle age and sort of realizing that and coming around to, like, well, if I just accept that as the way that it is, then I can sort of move forward from that. And by that, I mean, like, not figure things out, but realize that maybe I don't need to figure everything out. And maybe I can sort of exist as I am and sort of react to things as they happen. And I feel like that's something that I kind of tried to put into Walnut Ridge when I was writing it, was this sort of, I think it's very important to look into things and be learned and to, philosophize. But it's not always going to be the ultimate answer. And sometimes not having the answer is part of what can help me as a person anyway. I'll speak for myself, is it will help me, live my day-to-day life more effectively and, as less of a burden to myself and less of a harm to myself potentially.
Yeah.
Alan and I have both talked actively about our neurodiversity. As neurodiverse people, sometimes we're completely clueless. We're like, oh, I don't understand why people are doing this at all. So, yeah. I came to the same conclusion. I think I was about 30 when I finally came to that conclusion and went, you know what? Screw it. There's just no point in trying.
That's it's funny. I'm not diagnosed with anything formally. But I know that when I have, beta readers read my stuff, they'll ask me like, oh, is this character, is this character autistic or neurodivergent? And I'm like, no, they're just normal. They think like everyone does, right? And, eventually I had to realize that like, oh, maybe there's something that I'm missing here.
That's so funny because
Cool.
I have a question that is, like why was it important for you to include neurodivergent characters? But maybe you didn't do that on purpose.
What do you mean? They're all just normal people in there. That's no. Obviously, like when I was writing, I put a lot of myself into a lot of the characters, but also I put a lot of the stuff, like I was talking about, that I didn't understand and that I wanted to understand about, people who I knew and friends that I'd had and relationships I'd been in. I wanted to try and sort of get through that by writing about it and sort of characterizing these things and trying to do it without having an outcome in mind and seeing what the characters maybe could teach me, if that doesn't sound too pretentious.
Sounds like fun to me. I don't know.
No, I love that. Diane, did you say there were some questions in the chat?
There was one anyway. Flub wants to know what the inspiration was for the setting of his world.
The world, it's pretty much just like, it's modern world as we know it. Some of this, could probably be explained away as, plot convenience, but it also sort of, I wanted to sort of touch on general sort of like mob mentality, but almost more like a sort of collective like ennui or malaise, because when the aliens come down in Walnut Ridge, they pump a little bit of like happy gas into the atmosphere, but not really enough to like mind control anyone. And most of the population within a couple weeks is pretty much like, this seems all right. These aliens are going to be good to us. We deserve to have an eternal paradise. We've done our time here. Let's just go with these guys, which is something that I think, it's obviously exaggerated for the fiction of the novel, but it is something that I think is like kind of fun to explore.
Considering the principle of oakwood for the pieces.
Yeah, there is a lot of, I tried to weave a little bit of, mental health and addiction narrative stuff into the story as well. So I hope that some of that comes through to people to whom that might, mean something.
Would you mind talking about those aspects of your book a little bit? I mean, the thing that jumps out to me the most, and I have had substance abuse problems, but I've never gone to like, I've never had to go to an addiction clinic or anything like that. But the setting is kind of very addiction clinic-like.
Yes,
right?
The setting, the main setting of Walnut Ridge, which has been turned into the place where you go before you get turned into goo to go off into space, is described as a former rehabilitation drug and alcohol treatment center. And that was good for me because that was just sort of writing through some stuff that I had been through, but also it gave me sort of a chance to sort of discreetly work in some of the things that I was going through, years ago in early recovery for me. And some of the things that I was trying to figure out and trying to figure out what I actually needed to figure out and what I didn't need to figure out and had to just sort of go with. And part of that, I think that can be an interesting sort of venue to go through, in terms of any sort of like institutionalized living facility that you can get. Certain types of people can get very acclimated to the point. Like I do very well institutionalized. I can acclimate very well to that. And I can have my fun in my little pockets where I can get it. And then I'm back to, standing in line, filling out my paperwork, stuff like that.
Yeah, and me, I fight that kind of thing every step of the way. I dread the possible future of me ending up in a care home because I know that I will fight with everybody and I won't even want to. I'll try to get along. I will, but it just won't work. I understand.
Yeah. One more question for you,
Yes.
Dan. Before we started this conversation, in the green room, if you will, we were chatting about horror and a subgenre of horror called bizarro. Do you feel like you know enough about bizarro to kind of describe that to the audience?
I kind of have always kind of described the work that I do as weird, and some other people, like I've written some other things that I think other people would describe as bizarro, and it almost feels like they're sort of in the same vein to me. Although bizarro feels like it has a few less logical constraints to the worlds in which it takes place in, but it doesn't push it so far that it's totally, surreality either. It's like it's like right at the tipping point of where suspension of disbelief can happen. And you can kind of slip into that and then slip back out of it without getting jarred too much. But getting jarred definitely a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I would definitely describe your work is at least on the border of bizarro, just with the robot alien angels, right?
Like I feel like a lot of times what I see in bizarro is things that are not normal presented as though they are, and I feel like if you do it well, then the reader will kind of go along with that, and that's kind of the sweet spot where I try and go for.
Yeah. Ooh, I want to.
Makes sense to me.
Let's try and remember that comment, Diane, because that reminds me of some of Brad's work actually that I want to talk about. So I guess we should start transitioning a little bit here. Let's bring Brad in. Go ahead.
Before we do, we have a question again from the audience. Celto says, I have a question for Dan. What was the biggest lesson you personally learned from Walnut Ridge and its story and characters, especially given all the weird satirical elements? I remember you saying you like to learn from the characters, so I'm just curious. And to be fair, a lot of my regular audience are writers, so this, feel free to answer from a craft perspective as well.
I feel like probably the thing I learned most from writing it was just sort of like I said, there is a through line of presumption and sort of arrogance through perceived intelligence, I would say. And what writing this helped me do was sort of get into a mind space to remind myself to kind of deflate my ego a little more and kind of not think either that I have the answers because, obviously I'm so intelligent, or to realize that, I don't need to feel like I have to have all the answers, because it's okay to not know things and to, make mistakes and stuff and to learn from them and try and do better next time. That was the main thing I got, I think, from writing it, in terms of like what the characters may have taught me.
It's very cool. I like that a lot. Yeah, that was a hard lesson for me in my life too.
Yeah. Oh, totally understandable. And then you realize, it's impossible. There's just too much to know, right?
The more you know, the more you realize you know nothing. Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I'm pretty sure that's a Zen koan somewhere.
I was quoting Bill and Ted, so I
don't know. Who's to say Bill and Ted isn't like some kind of cosmic Zen koan? I mean,
Exactly.
There's more to that movie than people think, to be fair. But yeah, anyway.
I haven't watched it in years. I really need to rewatch that. It keeps coming up in my life like over and over again over the years, and it's been a while. Before we continue on, Flub and Celtos, make sure you give Diane or you send us your address. I do have to warn everybody, I forgot to mention this at the top. I can't send outside of the US. I can't send books outside of the US because, the mail rates are just insane. Ask me someday.
Well, I'll tell you what you can do with Flub, because I know Flub is in the UK, right?
Oh,
I will give you the address of my one of my friends. Actually, you know what? Send the book to me. Well, no, you can't, because I'm still outside the US. Shit. We'll figure it out. Okay. We'll figure it out, Flub. I'll figure out how to get it to you with something from Game of Tones or one of the prizes I already owe you or something.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. That'd be great. That'd be great. Someday ask me about trying to send a book to Brazil. That was That was
Oh,
interesting.
God. Yeah, no, the UK isn't bad. It's just it can be a bit pricey, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah. All right, let's bring Brad into this thing. Let's bring Brad in. So you both have weird horror as a genre of interest listed on your websites. Like, you both write in it, you both enjoy it, right? How would you both define new weird, and what got you both of you interested into that subgenre? Let's start with Brad this time, and then we'll go back to Dan.
Whenever my first collection came out, the very first review came out at a horror magazine, and I was like, what? I had never thought of my work as horror in any kind of way. And then whenever I read the review, I was like, well, they're engaging with it in, horror related ways in which I was, I kind of saw my work in a different way and what the work was doing. So I was just really interested in kind of the constraints of what I had thought horror may have and then what the reality is. But I've always thought my work was more weird, like Dan had mentioned earlier, just like weird fiction. I don't know. I think with weird, it just has such an open kind of definition to it of what is weird. Well, weird, it's one of those things where it just has so much room to kind of grow. And I'm interested in what the wiggle room kind of does with the definition of that genre.
Yeah.
If I might say before Dan answers, all right, I often say to my viewers that I think we engage with subgenre to some extent too much in the field, right? Subgenre is a marketing label. It exists so that you can find an audience that will appreciate the kind of things that you write. But the story is the story, right? And sometimes it's not going to fit clear definitions, or sometimes it's going to overlap them, or sometimes it's going to transcend them in a way that you don't know, or it's going to have the markers of one when you were thinking in terms of another, right? Like the Beatles thought they were a blues band, like it's, I don't think we should put, I like the idea of engaging with, what defines a genre. So I think this is a great question, but I also think, not at all surprised that you may have seen it in a different light after exposing it to the world. Fair enough. Okay. Sorry.
No.
Carry on.
No, that's all fine. This is, Dan and I had a conversation even before Brad jumped on that covered a lot of the same stuff because we were talking about Bizarro. But I'm kind of curious, thinking too, like why does Bizarro in weird get put into the horror category necessarily? Because weird fiction, originally was fantasy, I believe, right? China Millville was the first big weird horror, new weird horror guy, right? And he was writing fantasy books. I don't know, Dan, what do you think?
I think just to sort of echo what Brad said about, genre constraints and kind of figuring that out for oneself in terms of one's own writing. In terms of like why there's crossover with, bizarre, weird, and horror, I think, part of it is probably, just comes down to the logistical reason of like, I think I think horror is very popular in general. A lot of people, have it as a genre that they enjoy, in addition to other things. I think even as a writer, sometimes you have these weird ideas that you want to do, and it can almost be easier to be like, all right, well, how, I want something like, when you want your conflict to happen, you're like, well, how bad can I make it? How crazy can I make this, when there are no constraints put on? And I feel like that's why I sort of, in terms of horror, at least, that's why I kind of veer to the weird. Because like, they always say like, write what you know, and write, as a horror person, like write what you're afraid of. And I don't really know if anyone wants to read like a 300-page story about, putting off calling the insurance company for like 6 weeks because you have so much anxiety. But, it's just
I don't know if I want to read it. That's one of my fears, man.
it's easier and more marketable to make some kind of weird, like fleshy tooth monster or something. So
I like that. That's great.
That's funny.
I don't know if anyone wants to read what I'm really afraid of, so I make up crazy shit. Okay. Fair enough.
That is really funny. That was really funny. Brad, one thing that you do in your stories is you have a lot of like really weird stuff happening, but your characters are kind of like, yeah, this thing happened, whatever, which I think kind of relates with what with what Dan was saying about the Bizarro, right? Like these really strange things are kind of just like taken in step. Like just to give an example to the audience, you have a story called The Guide to King George, right? And it's about like this, I guess, frog monster or some kind of like amphibious creature, right? That they find, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. It becomes monstrous, right? But everyone's like, yeah, this is King George. He's like this weird giant monster, and we're going to kind of like build a zoo around him, right? But it's not like a big deal to the main characters. Now, when the people first come to the zoo, they're like, oh my God, and they lose their shit, right? And that's how they kind of get a draw to their little zoo thing. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like a lot, and that's not the only story that's like that. Many of your stories are like that.
Yeah, I think, a large part of it, I think, is I just think the world is a weird place and we encounter weird stuff every day. So part of me is just like, yeah, it's weird, and, kind of move on from it. But I grew up on a farm, and just observing the world that closely with animals and the environment and just the interactions between the two, and then you bring in humans, like it's just weird to observe. And I think I was just trying to honestly kind of bring some of that weirdness out by giving these situations, like you said, that they're very strange, but then the people don't really process them as being strange. They're reality. It seemed real to me.
That's a really great theme in science fiction, I think, because let's face it, technology is like this, isn't it? Right? Like, I'm 49. And in my life, I have gone from like no internet to people are literally having telepathic conversations with their cell phones on a regular basis. And we all just kind of go, oh yeah, right? Like nobody's fazed by this at all, right? We're all like, yeah, okay, it's your cell phone. Why are we calling it a phone? That's like the least of its functions. It's your personal magic computer that science fiction writers were writing about in 1970s and 1980s cyberpunk, and we're just like, oh yeah, it's we don't take any more notice of it than we do like, the color of the sky, except when we're kids, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really interesting fact of human nature, that we kind of just accept these new things into our environment. So I love that theme taken to an extreme, right? With this frog monster. That's cool because, yeah, people are like that, man, right? They would just kind of accept it. I agree with that. That's cool.
Do you believe in ghosts?
I don't not believe in them.
I'm kind of being jokey here, but I was just wondering what you would say to that, because I kind of feel like you would be like a guy, be like, oh, there's this horrific ghost standing next to me. Hey man, what's going on? High five. I'm going to go back to typing my story now.
According to a study I read, 60% of all people believe in ghosts. So you're actually in the majority if you do. I'm kind of with you though. I don't not believe in them.
Yeah, I'm like the same too. I don't not believe in them, but I don't actually also believe in. I don't know. Let's just say this: my family folklore has a lot of weird things in it, and no one can explain some of them. And it's just like, oh yeah, this weird thing happened. Oh well, and then that's it.
Yeah, the world's a weird place. We can't explain it. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Celto asks, was there a specific reason for the frog being the basis for the monster? I might have missed it. No, you didn't. I didn't. Nobody's asked that question. So, but it's a good one.
No. So with this collection, this was one of the first stories that I had actually written for the collection. And I was interested in just like, I want to start this collection by writing a monster story. And I just thought, here's a frog. Let me turn this thing into a monster and see what I can do with it. A lot of my writing is kind of just like this idea pops into my head and I see if it works or not. I abandon a lot of stuff. But with this one, I was like, yeah, this frog monster stuff is working pretty well. So I stuck with it.
That's cool. I don't know. It was a stupid ADHD idea that came out of the back of my brain and it kept me out of it. But it makes a good story. Yeah. Sweet.
That's interesting. I mean, you also tend to sympathize with the monster a lot in the stories. You tell a lot of the stories from their point of view, or characters who sympathize with those monsters.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very curious about why you do that. We had a guest on, I don't know, probably 6 months ago, and her opinion was, because she did a lot of the same, that people who sympathize with the monsters tend to feel othered in some way. Is that your experience? What do you think about that?
That's interesting. I've never heard anybody say that. But I mean, maybe that is true. I don't really know. I think I'm interested in kind of, we're used to the monster being the bad, the big bad. And I think I'm just interested in what if we flip that a little bit and we look at monsters in different ways. As you know, a lot of the stories, the humans are the monsters and in many situations.
Yeah.
And I think probably the time period in which I had written a lot of the book and just, growing up and being an adult, you kind of see the world differently about what humans are capable of, maybe. Some pessimism, I guess, kind of works in there, or cynicism, or maybe truth, or a mixture of all three. But I'm just really interested in, I think, what the monster actually is and not just what we project onto that monster, and how humans relate to that in some kind of way.
Interesting. Cool.
Makes sense to me.
You do a lot of really cool structural stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That's obviously something that interests you. To go back to to King George for an example for our audience, in The Guide to King George, it's written as a guidebook, right? Mm-hmm. You have another story that's kind of like a choose your own adventure, but it's not really a choose your own adventure. It's more of like a choose your own ending type of a thing. What inspires you to do this? And do you have any, how can I say? Well, let's just go with what inspires you to do this first, and then we'll get to the rest later.
I was having a hard time writing this book at first because it was written it was largely written during the COVID period when COVID was so, prevalent, and the world was, seemed like a really dark place. We were all at home. It was just, of course, not a great time for many of us. And I felt like I really needed to be writing because I had so much time in which I just had is time to do. So I was like, how can I write, Bradley, when all this stuff is going on in the world? So I started working with different kinds of forms to see if that would kind of spark something for me and make writing fun. And, that probably sounds ridiculous, I guess, but I needed something to kind of spark my imagination in some kind of way and to make that process fun and something that I wanted to do. And by creating those forms, like you said, there's a work manual, there's a choose your own adventure like story, there's a state test, there's an epistolary story, there's a story in all questions, there's a police transcript. All those things just kind of, really they were fun for me to do, and they're what helped me tell these stories. So I in a way, I had to have these forms for it to work.
You've written in so many different structures. Do you have any advice to the writers in the audience on how to, find a structure that works for you in your writing style, and maybe like, how to make a story work in a strange format?
Yeah, for me, it's about experimentation and not being afraid to fail. I tried for the longest time to write one of the stories as a recipe. I was just determined I was going to have this recipe story, and I could not do it. And I tried for months and months and months, and it failed, and I'm okay with that because it turned into something else. One of the stories to take to leave, which is the choose your own adventure story, or choose your own ending story. It essentially was a work of Flash. Not even Flash. It was a work of like micro. It was about 100-ish words. And then it expanded into a Flash. And then it expanded into a short story. And then it finally expanded into what it became. And each time I was going through with these drafts of this story, I was like, the story is just not good, until it found the structure that it has in the book. And now I'm really proud of that story. I think it works really well for what I wanted it to do, but I failed over and over and over again with different methods to get it where I think it needed to be. In many years too, that's been a story, I think since 2017, maybe, that I first drafted. And then now it's finally out.
That's great. Good advice. Try new things, experiment. Don't be afraid to fail. Keep what you wrote. Maybe you can use it in some other way. Makes sense to me. Good advice.
Let's talk about publishing a little bit for both of you. Do you have any advice for our audience on publishing, and what was your publishing journey like?
Well, when I had my first story collection, that was 2021, and I had a pretty good experience. I think I had no idea what I was doing, and I was just like, here's a publisher that's looking for work. I had found them listed on an article, just a website about those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
I sent letters out like, one does, and there was the response. So it was very easy. I think I was lucky in that kind of way. With the second book, I had known someone who had published with the press that I wound up at. And yeah, his collection was very similar to mine, and just kind of approach and what it was trying to do. So I got lucky, I think, very lucky.
Awesome. What about you, Dan?
I would say also, like, for Walnut Ridge, I would say definitely luck. I happened to, I was producing more than I was, querying and submitting. And I happened to come across Dead Star Press, an advertisement. I think it was on Facebook or something. Seemed like a decent fit. I sent the manuscript out and expected not to hear anything either for 6 months or ever. And, they got back to me right away, and the timing had just worked out. They were really looking for something, and I happened to have something that they wanted. But yeah, it really is, a matter of luck, like Brad said, because it can be a slog, going through all that, trying to query and submit, and it's a little bit soul draining sometimes, but you got to do it.
How long did it take you, Dan, to hear back?
To hear back, I want to say it was within days.
Oh, wow.
The timing had just happened to work out perfectly. I don't even know how it all came together like that, honestly.
That's great.
Yeah.
I like to tell people, just don't get discouraged, right? I mean, what is a good story? It's really subjective, right? And even having had an experience with having published an anthology where, I was the publisher, right? I realize that sometimes even good stories that you really like don't get included because it's just not what that particular project is looking for, right? Or, you have two really good stories and they're very similar, so you have to choose between them. Right. So luck does have a great deal to do with it. But the fact is, I have sold every serious short story I have ever written. And most of that is persistence, right? I just kept submitting until somebody took it, right? So follow the rules of publishing, keep submitting, when you get it back, submit it again somewhere else. Somebody will take it eventually.
Awesome. Diane, do we have any questions in the chat?
Not at the moment. People seem to have been intensely listening. So this is kind of fun. What, have you run out of things to ask?
No, of course not.
Come on, this is you. Oh, wait, no, now we have one. Okay, Celto says, this is a question for everyone. How do you maintain confidence in your stories, given that this field is so subjective? That is a damn good question. Go ahead, guys.
Gosh, that is a great question. I don't know that I have a lot of confidence, if I'm being honest. I don't know. That I have to think about that. I really don't know.
Yeah, no, I was, the same thing popped into my mind. I was like, confidence. I don't really think about it. I just kind of try and ignore it and like, well, this is what I decided to do. So this is what I'm going to do. And what will happen will happen. And if I keep at it, I believe things will happen.
I think too, like, I just don't take it personal. I mean, I guess it's hard to do is to separate your work from, kind of, a personal reaction. But I think over the years, I've learned that I have to separate the two. Is it the same for you all?
Yes, definitely. Right. Like, I don't know. For me, I do go through periods where I get discouraged and then I don't end up submitting for a long period of time. And then I get back into it when I have more spoons. Right. Confidence. I don't know. I guess try to take the successes that you do receive as what they are, as successes, because we're so prone to thinking about all the bad stuff that happens to us and we don't actually give enough weight to the good things that happen to us. The fact is, if you submitted a story somewhere and they took it, right, have confidence. Like, it doesn't matter where that was, right? Somebody did it, right? And if your friends are telling you, this is a great story, I would really like to read this in a magazine, right? Or in a book, and you submit it somewhere, well, you have more people out there like your friends. You're going to find them eventually, right? Not taking it personally, and, keep reminding yourself to, and I guess writing for yourself, right? Like, you never know if other people are going to like what you write. I don't have any confidence in that, right? None at all. So I write for me, right? If I like it, well, maybe somebody else will too. And if I had something to say, maybe there'll be something in what I wrote that somebody else will connect with. And I just got to find them. It's hard out there because the industry is so big and so opaque. Right? It's almost impossible for even the big publishers to have any idea what's really going to sell. Right? So do your best and hope for the best.
I would add to that. Diane and I both know like authors that publish with like Tor or bigger publishers, you know what I mean? And they have expressed to us lack of confidence at times. You know what I mean? Like, and these are people who've got like 5 book deals or whatever. You know what I mean?
Words, yeah. And they're still like, I don't know. I'm just trying my best here, man. And they all say that too. I just got lucky.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will say that something that a good piece of advice that I got was to, how to deal with, the inner critic was, not to try to silence it, but to sort of just, listen to it and say, thanks for sharing. And then kind of try to move past it. Cause I know that I'll be reading something sometime that I would consider to be, like a contemporary of what I would write. And, my mind will be bouncing back and forth between like, oh man, this is terrible. How did this get, I'm so much better than this. And then like 2 sentences later, I'll be like, fuck, I can never write this well. And it's just like, it's just these extremes that neither of which are objectively true. So.
Yeah.
Here's the thing that I've done. Okay. And all right. So this is a double-edged sword because it can go either way, right? Sometimes you go back and read stuff that you wrote like a while ago, and sometimes it's like, oh God, what was I thinking? Right? And sometimes it's like, hey, this is really good. Did I write this? I don't remember writing like this. This is great stuff. Yeah, that could do you some good too.
100%. And as somebody who's been involved in not writing, but many other creative pursuits, it's like that with everything. It's like that with music. I think music's actually more soul destroying than writing.
Oh, having done music industry stuff, yes, 100% agree with you.
Dan, I know you're a musician. Do you agree or no?
I feel like the music is a little quicker, at least.
Yeah, the immediate feedback of you suck.
Quicker at destroying your soul. Yeah. Just puts you out of your misery.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can speak to the podcast at least. Like, we've had episodes with like really famous people that did not have a lot of downloads. And then we'll have episodes with obscure people that have tons of downloads. You know what I mean? You just can't. It's hard to know. It's hard to know what people are interested in listening to or seeing or consuming, however you want to phrase that. It's just just do what you want to do and fuck it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're getting top of the hour here, Diane. I think we need to close it up. Believe it or not.
Oh, I'm just getting started here. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Well, thanks for coming, guys. You're both amazing. We have a couple of questions that we asked.
Yes, there we go. Okay. I thought you were going to skip those questions.
No. Come on now. Trust me. All right. Yeah, we have a couple of questions we always ask our guests before we close out an episode. And the first question is, what are you working on right now? Where can we find your work? And the second is, what is giving you hope right now?
You can find me at my website, which is dvsfiction.com, dvsfiction.com. You can check out deadstarpress.com. They published Walnut Ridge, so you can get that there. I'm on Instagram at dvsfiction, YouTube, same thing. So that's where you can find me. I just finished drafting for a call that's opening up in August, and it was another weird sort of bizarro horror erotica weird kind of story that I'm hoping to place. And if I don't, I'm definitely gonna, self-publish it. So I'm feeling pretty decent about it.
Awesome.
Cool.
So I can be found at bradley-sides.com. And I am currently working on a novella. I never thought I would write a longer kind of project, but I'm making good progress on it. And I hope I'll be finished. Next month. Actually, it's going surprisingly really well. So I don't want to jinx it or anything,
Awesome.
but hopefully that'll be out next year.
Awesome.
And my students, I think, are giving me hope. Like I'm seeing a lot of great creative work from them, and that always inspires me.
That's cool. What about you there, Dan? What's giving you hope right now?
Well, what's kind of lately has been giving me hope is sort of I recently learned the term, I'm not a very well educated man, so I recently learned the term Jeremiad, which is a long literary piece about kind of lamenting how bad everything is and how we're at the end of it's the end times and how can it get any worse. And just the fact that this is a thing, a term that has been around for quite a long time and yet we're still kind of going sort of in conjunction with, I think a lot of times about that Genesis song, Land of Confusion, and how even 40 years ago we were talking about how awful it is and how there's no coming back from it. But what really gives me hope is the line in that song where Phil Collins says that he and his generation are going to put it right. So Phil Collins is giving me hope. I'm just waiting for him to put it all right. I trust him.
Oh
yeah, they're going to tag team it.
That's cool. You have a good point.
We're banking on Phil Collins. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm a little worried now, I think. I think I'm more worried
now. Hey, he's right, though. We still somehow manage to limp through even when it looks like things are most dire, doesn't it? Like, you know what? I'm going to throw in something here, right? So I finally got around to reading... Now, damn, why don't I remember the title? It flew right out my head. But H.G. Wells did a big, long meditation on, basically the world is coming to an end at about the turn of the century, right? And, the 20th century, of course, for those who don't actually know who H.G. Wells is, which might be possible, right? But the thing is that, humanity has believed we are going to destroy ourselves for more than 100 years, and we are still here. That gives me hope.
Definitely. Definitely. That's awesome.
I like what Celta has to say. He says, I can feel it coming in the air. Oh, Lord.
I had to do it.
Yeah.
Had to do it. Couldn't control myself.
You did. Yep.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. We really appreciate it. Don't forget, if you are a more shy person and you want to get a book and you live in the U.S., send us an email. That's itgontpanic@gmail.com. Email me. Say what your favorite If This Goes On episode is, and we'll send you something. It will be cool.
And Flub, we'll work something out. So,
yeah,
you bet. Thanks for everyone who submitted comments and questions, and thanks for joining us today. I think I'm going to go to our theme music and pipe us out, as so to speak. So thank you, Dan and Brad. I've had a great time. I hope you have too. Yeah. And you guys were a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited by Alan Bailey and produced by Ken Schrader. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower. Additional music by Christopher Snydrosky. And outro music by Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robinson. A special thanks to our guests, Dan Scammel and Bradley Sides. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.